I never thought anything like this would happen to me. I'd heard stories about people finding crawl spaces or boarded up rooms in old houses, but I always assumed those were exaggerated or rare. The kind of thing you read about online, shake your head at, and move on. But when I moved into my first apartment by myself, I learned that sometimes the strangest, most unsettling things don't happen in stories. They happen in real life, when you're least expecting them. The building I chose was nothing special. It was old, a little rundown, but the rent was cheap enough for me to afford on my own. It was a converted house, one of those big colonial-style places that have been split into several smaller units. My apartment was on the second floor, and at first glance, it seemed pretty ordinary. A small living room, a bedroom barely big enough for my bed and a dresser, and a narrow kitchen that led into a bathroom at the back. The floors creaked, the windows rattled on windy nights, but I figured that came with the age of the place. The landlord didn't give me much history about the building. He was the type of guy who handed me the lease and keys without much small talk. He did say the house had been standing for over a century, and at some point in the 50s, it was chopped up into 3 apartments. I remember thinking about all the people who must have lived there before me. Families, boarders, students. It felt like one of those places where the walls had absorbed too many stories to ever really feel empty. The first couple of weeks were uneventful. I worked long hours, came home exhausted, and spent most nights zoning out in front of my TV. But as I got more settled, I started noticing little things that made me uneasy. The first was in the hallway that connected the living room to the bedroom. The floorboards there always felt colder under my feet than the rest of the apartment, even when the heat was running. At first, I brushed it off as bad insulation, but then there were the sounds. I would hear what I thought were faint knocks or scuffs coming from the walls. Not constantly, but just enough to make me pause. I blamed the neighbors downstairs, or maybe pipes expanding and contracting. Old houses make noise, I told myself. Everyone knows that. It wasn't until the night I was unpacking the last of my boxes that something really caught my attention. I had a stack of books I wanted to put on the shelf in the bedroom, and as I was sliding the shelf against the wall, I noticed something strange. The wall wasn't flat. On the left side, just near the baseboard, there was a slight indentation, like the surface dipped inward. I ran my hand over it, thinking maybe the plaster had warped. My fingers caught the edge of something hard, like a seam. I crouched down and tapped. It didn't sound solid like the rest of the wall. It sounded hollow. I leaned closer and noticed that the paint on that section was just a shade different than the rest of the wall, as if it had been repainted at a different time. That discovery left me uneasy. I wanted to push on it to see if it gave way, but at the same time, I felt like I shouldn't. I was trespassing into something I wasn't supposed to know about. I told myself it was probably just sloppy renovation work, some patch-up job from years ago. Still, that thought stuck with me. Over the next few days, I found myself glancing at that section of wall whenever I walked past. It became this constant background thought, something I didn't want to think about but couldn't avoid. At night, when everything was quiet, I swore I could hear faint, irregular creaks coming from inside it. Sometimes, if I stood still in the hallway, I thought I could feel a faint draft slipping out from the seam. One weekend afternoon, after too much overthinking, I finally decided to look closer. I pressed my palm against the wall and applied steady pressure. To my surprise, it gave slightly, like a door that hadn't been opened in years. My heart picked up. I stopped right there, pulling my hand away. I wasn't ready to push it open. Not yet. I tried to put it out of my mind, but the more I avoided it, the heavier it weighed on me. Every night I lay in bed, staring at the dark outline of that hallway, wondering what was behind that hollow wall. I started losing sleep, tossing and turning, listening for sounds that may or may not have been there. The apartment no longer felt like mine. It felt like I was sharing it with something unseen. The breaking point came one night, when I was dozing on the couch in the living room. It must have been around 1 in the morning when I woke up to the unmistakable sound of a thud. Not from outside, not from the neighbors, but from inside the wall. I sat up straight, my skin crawling, and listened. There was nothing else. Just silence. That was the moment I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was back there, and I had. The next morning, I couldn't shake the sound I'd heard. It hadn't been faint. It hadn't been something I could dismiss as pipes or neighbors. It was a deliberate noise, heavy enough to echo inside the hollow space. I didn't tell anyone about it. It felt strange to even say out loud, like admitting it would make it more real. But all day, while I was at work, I kept replaying it in my head. By the time I came home, I had already made up my mind. I was going to open it. I waited until later that night when the building was quiet. I grabbed a flashlight, my phone, and a flathead screwdriver from a junk drawer. Standing in the hallway, I pressed my palm against the seam again, right where the wall dipped inward. With the screwdriver, I wedged at the edge until I felt a slight give. Paint cracked and flaked under the pressure, and with one steady push, the panel loosened. I expected a small crawl space or some old piping. Instead, the wall swung inward an inch, like it was a narrow door disguised by drywall and paint. Cold air seeped out, colder than the hallway ever felt. My stomach dropped as I realized I was about to step into something that hadn't been opened in years. I pushed the door wider, just enough to shine my flashlight inside. The beam cut through dust and darkness, landing on a narrow space behind the wall. It wasn't very tall, maybe 4 feet high, and extended back further than I could see. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and the air smelled of damp plaster and old wood. I crouched down, crawling halfway inside, my flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. At first, it looked like nothing more than forgotten space between the walls. But as I moved further in, the light revealed something that made my breath catch. The space opened up into a small, hidden room. The room was barely 6 by 6 feet, like a forgotten cell. The walls were bare wood, unpainted, with nails rusting in the beams. The floor was littered with debris, old fabric, bits of plaster, what looked like scraps of paper that had yellowed with age. In the far corner sat an overturned metal chair, and next to it, a small wooden crate. I froze, staring at it. The sight of a chair in a space like that was unnerving enough, but the crate made my skin prickle. I crawled further in, my knees pressing into the dusty floorboards, and shined the flashlight directly on it. The wood was cracked and dry, but there was no mistaking it a storage box of some kind. For a long moment, I just sat there, debating if I should open it. My rational side told me it would probably just contain old junk left behind decades ago. But another part of me whispered that there was a reason this room was hidden, a reason someone had sealed it away. I reached forward and lifted the lid. It stuck at first, but with a sharp tug, it broke loose. Inside were papers, stacks of them, folded and crumpled. Some were journals, their covers brittle and torn, while others looked like letters stuffed into envelopes. The handwriting on them was faded, looping script that was hard to read in the dim light. I didn't take the time to go through them, not then. My hands were trembling too badly. Instead, I closed the crate and backed out of the room, pulling the hidden wall shut behind me. I stood in the hallway for a long time afterward, my heart pounding in my ears. I had found something real, something secret, and it terrified me. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining the chair, the crate, the feeling of being inside that narrow hidden space. My mind kept spinning on why it had been sealed off in the first place. By morning, I convinced myself it was nothing sinister. Maybe it was just old storage, a room boarded up during renovations, forgotten over time. But deep down, I knew better. The following evening, I forced myself back in. This time, I brought the crate out into the hallway where I had better light. I started going through the papers carefully, one by one. The journals were filled with frantic handwriting, entries that seemed to jump between dates in the late 70s and early 80s. The letters weren't addressed to anyone, more like drafts never sent. What I could piece together was unsettling. Whoever wrote them talked about being watched, about hearing voices in the house, about not being able to sleep. Some entries described scratching sounds in the walls, footsteps in the hallway at night, and the feeling of being followed even when they were alone. The more I read, the colder I felt. It wasn't just random rambling, it was consistent. Page after page, this person described the same kind of paranoia and fear that I had been experiencing myself. One letter, near the bottom of the pile, made me set the papers down completely. It said, in shaky handwriting, "They don't want me to find the room. If I go in there again, I don't think I'll come back out." That was enough. I shoved everything back into the crate and slid it into the hidden room where I had found it. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the flashlight. When I closed the wall behind me again, I felt a surge of relief, like I had sealed something away that shouldn't have been disturbed. But that relief didn't last. That night, as I lay in bed, I woke up to the sound of movement in the hallway. Not creaking floorboards, not the house settling, but slow, deliberate footsteps right outside my bedroom door. I sat frozen in the dark, holding my breath, listening as the steps stopped directly in front of the door. I didn't move. I didn't dare. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. Eventually, the sound faded, the weight lifted, and the silence returned. I stayed awake until the sun came up, afraid to even close my eyes. The following day, I tried to convince myself it had been a dream, a trick of exhaustion. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the truth. Whatever was sealed away in that hidden room wasn't just history. It was something that hadn't left. Something that didn't want to be forgotten. After that night, everything in the apartment felt different. I couldn't walk through the hallway without feeling watched. Couldn't sit in the living room without hearing faint creaks overhead. Couldn't lie down in bed without waiting for footsteps to return. The thought of the hidden room lingered with me every second. I kept telling myself I had sealed it, that I had left everything the way I found it, but the unease never left. 3 days later, I came home from work to find the hallway colder than ever. Not just drafty, but a deep chill that seeped into my bones. I dropped my bag, stood still, and listened. There were faint noises like shuffling coming from inside the wall. My stomach turned. I tried to ignore it, moving into the living room, but the feeling of being followed never left me. It was like every step I took was mirrored by something behind that wall. That night, I sat up in bed, unable to sleep, staring toward the hallway. Around 2 a.m, I heard it again, the thud. The same heavy sound that had started all of this. My heart was pounding as I grabbed my flashlight, slid out of bed, and crept into the hallway. The seam of the hidden wall was visible in the glow, and I swear I could see it shifting slightly, as if pressure was being applied from the other side. I should have left. I should have locked my bedroom door and waited for morning. But something inside me said I had to know. I had to see. My hands shook as I pried the wall open again. The air that rushed out was freezing, almost damp. I crawled inside with the flashlight clenched in my hand, every nerve in my body screaming at me to stop. But I kept going until I reached the small hidden room. At first, it looked the same. The overturned chair, the crate shoved into the corner. But as my light swept across the floor, I realized something had changed. The papers I'd stuffed back into the crate weren't inside it anymore. They were scattered across the floor, arranged in a rough circle. And in the center of that circle, etched into the dust, were scratch marks long, uneven gouges in the wood that hadn't been there before. I froze, staring at them, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I told myself it was rats. Maybe some animal had gotten in. But the scratches were deliberate, forming crude lines that almost looked like words. I crouched down, shining the light directly on them, and for a moment, I swore I could make out the word, stay. My throat went dry. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall behind me, and nearly dropped the flashlight. The sound echoed sharply in the confined space, making me feel like something was about to answer. I wanted to get out of there, but before I could turn back, the beam of light caught something I hadn't noticed before. In the corner opposite the chair, half hidden by shadows, there was a small door. It wasn't like the panel I'd come through. It was rough wood, nailed shut in a crooked frame. The nails were old, the wood splintered, but it was unmistakably a door. I stood there, staring at it, every part of me screaming to leave it alone. But I couldn't. Something about it drew me closer, as if I had already made the decision the moment I saw it. My hand shook as I reached out and tugged on the edge. The nails groaned, the wood resisted, but slowly, one of the planks gave way. The smell that came out was overwhelming, a mix of mildew and something metallic. I covered my mouth with my sleeve, gagging, but forced myself to shine the light inside. What I saw made me stagger back, hitting my shoulder against the wall. It wasn't another room. It was a crawl space, narrow and low, lined with wooden boards that were stained dark. In the center was a pile of objects, blankets, bits of clothing, and what looked like glass jars. My flashlight beam bounced off one, and I realized it was filled with something murky, floating inside. My stomach turned as I realized they weren't just jars. They were containers, each holding what looked like small animal bones. I dropped the board, stumbling backward, my flashlight shaking wildly. My pulse roared in my ears as I backed toward the opening I had crawled in from. But before I could get out, I heard it. A sound so faint it almost blended with my own breath. Whispering. It was coming from the crawl space. I froze, every muscle in my body locked. The whispering was low, uneven, like someone struggling to form words. I strained to hear my own breathing loud in the confined space. And then, clear enough that I couldn't mistake it, I heard the word again. Stay. That was enough. I scrambled back through the narrow passage, scraping my elbows and knees against the wood, not caring about the pain. I burst into the hallway, slamming the panel shut behind me, and staggered into the living room, gasping for air. My flashlight clattered to the floor, its beam spinning wildly across the ceiling. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, every light in the apartment on, staring at the hallway. Every creak, every gust of wind made me jump. But nothing else happened, not until the next night. I had convinced myself that maybe I had hallucinated it, that exhaustion and fear had twisted my senses. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I heard something that shattered any hope of that. From inside the wall came the sound of slow, deliberate scratching. Not animal scratching, not random. Long, steady drags of something sharp against wood. I pressed the pillow over my head, desperate to block it out, but it didn't stop. It went on for hours, until just before dawn, when the building finally fell silent again. By morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag, shoved some clothes inside, and left the apartment. I didn't go to work. I didn't call anyone. I just drove. I ended up spending the night at a cheap motel on the edge of town, sitting in the corner of the room, too afraid to close my eyes. But the worst part was that even there, away from the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. I thought leaving the apartment would solve everything. I convinced myself that whatever I had seen, whatever I had heard, would be trapped in that room, in those walls where it had been for decades. But after a night in the motel, I knew I was wrong. Even as I sat there with the curtains drawn and the TV playing on low volume, I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the circle of scattered papers, the scratches in the floorboards, the jars inside the crawl space, and that whisper. That single word that didn't leave my head. Stay. I lasted 2 nights at the motel before reality caught up with me. I couldn't keep paying for the room, and I didn't have anywhere else to go. My friends lived too far away, and I wasn't close enough with anyone to explain what was happening. So on the 3rd night, against every instinct I had, I went back. The apartment looked the same when I unlocked the door, but it didn't feel the same. The air was heavy, the kind of heaviness that makes it hard to breathe. I left my bag by the door and stood there for a while, trying to summon the courage to step inside. Eventually, I forced myself forward, turning on every light in the place one by one until every corner was glowing. It didn't help. If anything, it made the shadows darker. I avoided the hallway that first night back. I slept on the couch with the TV on, drifting in and out of shallow dreams. But at some point, I woke up to the faint sound of movement. My eyes snapped open, and I sat up, staring toward the darkened hallway. The hidden wall was closed, but I knew where it was. I knew what was behind it. The sound wasn't loud, but it was steady. A low dragging, like fingernails on wood, echoing from inside the wall. It didn't stop. It went on for hours. By morning, I felt like I was losing my mind. I didn't go to work, didn't answer my phone. I just sat in the kitchen, drinking coffee and staring at the hallway, waiting for the next sound. I kept telling myself I should call the landlord or the police or anyone. But what would I say? That my wall was whispering to me? That I had found a hidden room with jars of bones and words scratched into the floor? They wouldn't believe me. And even if they did, I wasn't sure what they could do. That night, I heard something worse. Not just scratching or footsteps, but breathing. Slow, uneven breaths, rising and falling just on the other side of the wall. I pressed myself against the arm of the couch, every hair on my body standing on end, listening to it go on and on. I didn't move until the first light of morning broke through the windows. I should have left for good. Packed my things, broken the lease, walked away, and never looked back. But something kept me there. Not just fear, but a kind of pull, like the hidden room had its grip on me. Like if I left, it wouldn't matter, because it would find me again. A week passed like that. Noises at night, exhaustion during the day. My nerves frayed to nothing. And then came the night that finally broke me. It was after midnight when I woke to the sound of the wall creaking open. I froze, every muscle in my body locked, staring toward the hallway. The panel was shifting slowly, inch by inch, opening into darkness. My throat tightened as cold air poured into the apartment. For a second, I thought I could see movement in the shadows beyond it. Something crouched low, waiting. I don't remember deciding to move. My body just acted on instinct. I grabbed my phone, bolted for the door, and ran. I didn't stop to grab clothes or my wallet or anything else. I just ran down the stairs and out onto the street, barefoot, shaking, barely able to breathe. I called a friend in the middle of the night, someone I hadn't spoken to in months, and begged them to let me stay. They didn't ask questions. I stayed there for weeks, long enough to figure out how to end the lease and get out without ever going back. I told the landlord the place had a mold problem. I didn't care if he believed me. I just needed to be done with it. But the thing is, I don't think it's done with me. It's been months since I left that apartment. I live in a different place now, a new building with clean walls and bright lights, and for the most part, things are quiet. But some nights, when the rest of the world is still, I'll hear it again. Faint, almost hidden. A slow drag of something sharp against wood. Sometimes, I'll wake up in the dark and swear I hear breathing just behind the wall of my bedroom. And every now and then, when I'm half asleep, I'll hear that same word, soft and close to my ear. Stay. I don't know what was in that hidden room. I don't know who built it, or why, or what happened in there all those years ago. But I know it wasn't just empty space. Something lived there. Something that didn't want to be found, but didn't want to be forgotten either. And I think, in some way, by opening it, I let it out. If I could go back, I'd never touch that wall. I'd ignore the seam, the sound, the cold draft. I'd live with the unease instead of giving into it. But it's too late for that now. The hidden room is sealed again, but it doesn't matter. Because whatever was inside, it isn't confined to that space anymore. And every night, when I close my eyes, I wonder how long it'll be before it stops whispering from the walls and starts whispering from the dark corners of the room itself.